Welcome to the Speaks Exchange podcast with your host, Donald Taylor. As a renowned learning and development industry expert, as well as chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, Donald sits down with experts from around the globe to talk business communication, learning technology, language, digital transformation, and engaging, upskilling, and reskilling your organization. This podcast is brought to you by Speaks, the first intelligent language learning platform for the digital workplace. Listen in and you might learn a thing or two.
Another Speaks Exchange podcast. I'm Donald Taylor, your host. I have with me Stefan van Hooydonk, the Chief Learning Officer of Cognizant. Stefan, great to have you here. Very quickly, can you introduce yourself? What's your role? What have you been doing? What are your passions?
Well, boy, that's a big question. Thank you very much for having me, Donald. I'm really enjoying doing things like this, and I'm looking forward. It's going to be a very, very nice chat. I'm the Chief Learning Officer of Cognizant, so that means that I'm taking care of the knowledge well-being of about 300,000 colleagues, which was quite daunting when I started the job. But it's beautiful to see how much passion there is and how much curiosity there is in all kind of different demographics. It's just a question for all of us in L&D: how do you unleash that? And what tricks and tips and tricks do you use on them to really make that happen? And I'm sure we're going to talk more about this. My passions, I have many passions really. I meditate two hours a day. I'm a fervent reader. I try to spend as much time as possible with the family. It's not always feasible because I've been pre-COVID. I was traveling 3 weeks a month. So, and when I was in Belgium, I was an art restorer, and I still love that, but I don't have a lot of time now. So let's talk about learning, I guess.
There's so many more questions I could ask about the travel, the meditation, everything else, the art restoration, but we have to stick on the learning track here. We'll do the other conversation over beer sometime. You've been in learning and development for a while, as best people have been, including some senior roles. So what have you learned during that time? What are the key takeaways?
I started in investment consulting for a stint of about 6 years, and then I moved into learning and development. Set up a business school in China. Very proud, is one of the major business schools now in Asia, China Europe International Business School. And then I moved into the corporate side, was setting up learning. Actually, I've always set up learning structures for Nokia. I've done that back in China, but also globally at Philips, at Agfa, at Flipkart, and now at Cognizant. And very early on, I was quite close to senior leadership. And I think senior leadership with regards to learning and development, they all get it. They all know why this is necessary. Typically, all these leaders are very curious themselves and avid learners. And avid kind of being really interested in the world and others and so on and so forth. Now, so though they get it, they often don't really see the value of the L&D group to really helping them towards supporting or helping the organization to move towards a certain goal where skills are needed. Quite a number of research that has been done as of late, the last 10 years or so, also within Cognizant we did some research. And you see a lot of CEOs that have these lofty goals for the next 5 years, and kind of 5 years from now we're going to conquer the world. The world is really changing all around us. We need to be ready for that change, and therefore we're going in this right strategic direction. Now, very often when the question is also asked in those surveys, do you think that your L&D department or your people strategy or your skills in your organization is really going to help towards that goal? And very often the answer is no, or at least a few of the organizations, the CEOs think that they have everything lined up for this magic to happen. And maybe as reflecting on us in L&D, maybe we're looking more backwards than forwards. Maybe we're trying more the tricks of the past versus preparing towards the tricks of the future. I've been doing quite a bit of work on curiosity, on meta-skilling, getting deep into data, making sure that our L&D folks are really in tune with not their own intuition of how learning should look like, but really on what does the science say? What does the cognitive science say? What is the difference between pedagogy and andragogy? And how do you have to redesign whatever you want to do towards those goals? And how do you therefore create a credibility in your organization to drive this? Maybe back to the questions. I've never had a single CEO ask me. They do ask about impact, but nobody's ever asked about return on investment. They get get it, that these dollars are needed for engagement purposes, for upskilling. What they're much more interested in is the return on expectation. Are you delivering the big goals and the expectations they have of the future? And that's a big challenge for all of us, I think.
I think it's fair to say that those surveys generally return lists of top priorities of CEOs in which skills and talent is in the top 3. For the past 10 years, we've seen people saying, this is important to our organization, but they don't associate that necessarily with the learning and development department. Very often, they know they have to recruit for skills, they have to get people learning more in the organization, but they don't necessarily think that it's the learning and development department's job to do it. Is that your experience? And if so, where are we failing to register in the minds of the people at the top of organizations?
I think 10, 15 years ago, absolutely not. But I think nowadays they see that more and more, at least in the CEOs that I've been interfacing with. Also, I'm seeing that learning, and because of this skilling, in the past, skills could be bought really easily. Nowadays, if you want, especially skills at the cutting edge, in our case, I'm working in Cognizant, IT support, IoT, machine learning, artificial intelligence, digital engineering, and all these skills, there's just not enough people out there in the street to recruit. So you have to start skilling. And many companies were quite complacent in saying, yes, we can find people on the street. But nowadays, we have to start skilling people internally and creating different ecosystems and creating different cultures. Because I think a lot of companies are paying lip service to skilling. Often doing work is considered productive time, and doing skilling doing skilling or learning is put in the same bucket as holidays, therefore not productive time. And that's I think a lot of managers are getting that now. And I'm also seeing that skilling, therefore, is becoming a board conversation. I think the challenge with all of us is, and especially also with our customers, is that we all went to school and we all have this romantic feeling of what good looks like. Now, very often, especially our leaders, they don't realize that learning when we went to school is a function of pedagogy and not of andragogy, and that there's completely different forces at play when you're dealing with learning and development for adults. Now, the challenge for a lot of L&D folks is exactly the same. We have this idea, and we have learned to trial and error. We, through opinions we have about learning, through some things we picked up on the way. But the challenge, by and large, is that there's no degree requirements for getting into L&D. Anybody can come into L&D, and that's a beautiful thing because you can create diversity, but it's also a challenge because there's no baseline of knowledge. If you go to the legal department, I used that example earlier, if you go to the legal department, the business leader is not going to say, give me a 2-page contract with 14 chapters. They're just going to trust you or these legal colleagues with whatever they need to do and do your magic, and we won't even interfere. In learning and development, that's not always the case very often, and also research shows that very often not only the what, but also the how is decided by senior management, because we're often interfering as learning and development folks with people senior to us. And if we're not careful, they're going to just tell us what we need to do, and not having that theoretical backing or not having that credibility combined with good project management and all the rest of it is just and organizational fluency is just harming us. And that's why it's so important for all of us to really get in tune with cognitive psychology, with latest theories, and move away from that intuition. And because the way I'm looking at the world is not the way you're looking at the world. And because I like to learn in a certain way, doesn't mean that you like learning in such a way. Just let's get rid of those feelings.
You're right, of course, that there's this issue that everyone's been to school, therefore everyone imagines they know what learning looks like. And there's a sort of natural progression of idea that a behavioural issue can be fixed with learning. That may not be the case. That the learning has to take place via a course. That may not be the case. And that the course has to take place simultaneously with other people, ideally in a classroom environment. That may not be the case. But that progression of ideas is something we've all experienced, regardless of gender, class, background, ethnicity. Just about everyone's gone through that process of learning at school. As you say, that's the andragogy side of it. But of course, adults are very different. I completely agree that cognitive sciences are essential for us to understand. But is that the basis for us being able to persuade other people in the organization that we know what we're talking about?
It's a start.
Okay.
If you know that stuff, you're so much more advanced than if you don't. For instance, spaced learning is much better for memory creation than block learn. Putting people in a room for 4 hours is always going to be worse, not as good as doing 1 hour a week. It might be a bit more logistically challenging to do 1 hour a week, but it's much better for your memory. And we have so many myths that we're also imposing our kids. For instance, underlining and highlighting is one of the worst ways to learn something. But we're still holding our kids accountable to how colorful their textbooks, this type of thing. No, so, but if we as learning and development folks are not in tune with that latest theory, or for instance, whether you're an auditive or a kinesthetic type of a learner, complete rubbish. But we're still going along with those things. And as learning and development folks, we need to be in tune with that. It's not only cognitive psychology, but it's also applied psychology. It's andragogics. But it's also just sheer professionalism. We need to have organizational fluency. We need to speak the lay of the land in our organizations. We need to be damn good at project management and so on and so forth, like you expect from any profession.
I totally agree about the project management side of things. And I have to say that one of the key skills I think that we're missing in learning and development myself is, yes, we need to be better at marketing. Yes, we need to be better at data and analytics, but project management is a huge yawning gap generally in learning and development. Organizations that do that well are spectacularly better, typically at L&D. So look, we need these skills in order to be proper professionals. That may give us a certain amount of confidence, but when we go into a conversation with the CEO, they're still, or indeed the senior managers, there's still the chance, isn't it, that they will treat learning and development like a pizza order company. Yeah, I want it this size. I want the ham and not the pineapple. So how do we avoid that? In the past, when we talked about this, you mentioned the idea that you had to speak their language. You've mentioned organizational fluency a couple of times. What does that mean, and how much does data have a part to play?
That's beautiful. I think the learning knowledge gets you into the door. It's data that gets the conversation going. And I think, but you see that also broader in HR and also many places in the organization, we're not celebrating data well. And if you can establish that, for instance, what I'm telling my teams now is I don't want them to go to any meeting until they have the right data with them. So for instance, last year we've trained 5,000 people. What is the billing rate change since last year? Because we made this investment as an organization. Or what is the efficiency in your team improved versus last year and things like that? And let's have a discussion about that first before you're going to throw some other pizza requests in our direction type of a thing. No? And it's amazing how the conversation changes dramatically. Instead of a parent-child conversation, you suddenly have an adult-adult conversation. Because they also have to justify that they've done the right things with that stuff and they've enabled their growth in their organization. Also, I think at CLO level or at any level, I think we've established in the company that there's a direct correlation between attrition and skilling. Now, suddenly you have the chief financial person or the chief HR person or the CEO talking because you can calculate the amount, how much it costs to recruit a person and how much a person is up to speed and all that jazz, you know. And if we're saying that the more people learn, the chances for them to stay back longer versus the people that don't learn is suddenly you get them talking. Now, this is data, which is where we used HR data and learning data together. I've also established, and that was more recently, the shadow of a manager and the importance of a shadow of a manager. If the manager learns a lot, and I'm not talking about learning just to go into classes, it's also reading books and articles and all the things that we can measure on our tools, and we have lots of different opportunities for people to learn so many methods. But once we see that the consumption of items goes up with the manager, the team reacts in the same way. Inversely, if the manager does not learn anything, then also the team's learning behavior is really low. And that's not for everybody, because you always have A players in your team, people that naturally want to go places, regardless of the shadow of the manager. But it's enormous how much, I never realized this. And actually in the past, I was a little bit skeptical about the management development as an overall theme, not about management development, but to over-index on management development, as if managers are radically different animals than the rest of the population. But I'm starting to think that maybe over-indexing in a manager isn't that bad after all.
So just to be clear, what you're saying here, people are consciously or unconsciously emulating the behaviour of the manager they're with. The manager's learning, they will spend more time learning. The manager's not learning, they will typically, with exceptions, spend less time learning. Again, that's something which is news to me and does show that it's probably worthwhile training managers possibly on anything, just because you get the rest of the people multiplied, get the effect multiplied across their team. So yeah, I agree with you. I too have been sceptical about the value of management training in the past, but I can see that there might be value there. You're talking here very fluently and very confidently about correlations between learning data, that's the stuff that we're in charge of in the learning and development department, and data from outside, attrition rates and so on. How confident do you think most learning and development people are, in your experience, with making those correlations? Never mind getting hold of the data to do it, but just being able to make the correlations and talk about them confidently. Do you think we're in a good place there?
I think we're in as good a place as we can ever be. It's all a function of creativity and just dig. It's a little bit like treasure hunting, no? You just start digging and you hope you find something. And you have some hypotheses that learning is valuable in the organization. And value can mean a number of things. And can mean that people stay longer, or people are better engaged, or, you could come up with many things. And so I think if in most companies you have some smart kids, in all companies you have really smart kids and adults and people who can do some data analysis. And if they're not in your L&D group, I'm sure there's people in either your IT group or your some other business group who are really good at this stuff. I'm quite lucky. In every organization that I had, I always set up an analytics team and also a marketing team. I think, and these two teams are really important to drive things forward. So I'm a little bit lucky now, but it doesn't have to be your own team. It's just how much are you curious really about proving your value. It's not proving your value because your CEO wants to see that value. It's the value that you want to prove to yourself first and foremost. And if that's the case, anybody else will follow, because you're going to stumble up onto really magical data. And it's not about bums in seats type of a thing, but it's something bigger. And now with COVID, I challenge every L&D leader and team to think deeply about what can we do to prove, to analyze, to move the organization in a new direction. For me, learning is much closer to transformation and change than anything else. So how can we as learning and development folks support that change and transformation? And what data do we need to prove the organization that they should take us seriously to move in that direction versus just tactically do some onboarding and do some management development and do some of the normal tactical stuff, And I'm not saying that these tactical stuff is wrong. You always have to do that, and you have to do it damn well. But there's a sea of opportunities out there if you just put your gaze towards it.
We do have to do this tactical stuff. There's always going to be the onboarding. There's going to be the mandatory training. There's going to be stuff that we just need to do to keep the organization operating. But you're saying that's not enough. And when we've talked, Stefan, you've often used this word transformational to suggest the idea that the learning and development department has a crucial strategic role in what the organization is trying to achieve. Can you just describe that a bit more? Because we've talked about quite tactically, if you like, having a conversation with the manager. How do you establish your credibility? What sort of things do we need to know? But now we're stepping back a bit and we're looking at the role of the department as a whole across the organization. What's it trying to achieve? And how can it make sure that it is able to achieve?
Oh, it's a beautiful question. For me, that boils down to, are you focused on efficiency or are you focused on effectiveness? And for me, efficiency is a function of, the metaphor would be for me a supermarket, where everybody is well structured and you have rows and you have sections and you have people responsible for the sections, and you just check in with your proverbial cart and you put whatever in your cart and you check out without your manager knowing, and typically an LMS is managing that structure. And then you get on with things. So, but what we're interested in a supermarket is only in what happens within the supermarket when people are actually in the system and buying that stuff. And also the people that are working in a supermarket are typically just responsible for their counter, but they're limited because they haven't designed the products or they're not really deep into that stuff. So that's one way of looking at learning and development. That's the engine, or the non-transformational part, I'd probably say. And on the other side, you can have the metaphor of a boutique shop, maybe a tailor, where when you go for a suit or for a gala dress or so, that this person needs to know everything there is about your body, about measurements, about how it would look like, and needs to know. So and suddenly in a boutique shop, the course might not be the solution. Anything goes to solve a solution. I've experienced with, for instance, sales groups that people say, okay, our sales guys and girls don't know enough about our products. Let's throw some more training at the products, at those sales guys. And actually, we found that they don't have the right portal to find out all there is to know about. So just maybe creating a portal does the trick. Or in one of my previous companies, we said, our managers are not cascading strategy. Let's do some training with them. And then we said, hold on, putting our boutique shop hat on. And they said, hold on, what is the issue? And we did a monthly questionnaire with 5 questions to all the people in the organizations. How do I have a one-on-one meeting with my manager? Do I have a team meeting once a week with the team? Does my manager commend me for something I do well, and some other questions? And we found out that actually 30% of our managers never had a one-on-one meeting with their team, or never had a team meeting. So just by focusing on those points, the problem went away automatically. Because when we started measuring those things, and suddenly things happened, and we didn't need to train things. So that's very much a boutique shop approach, where you're focusing much more on the basic problems.
Focusing on the problems and focusing on performance. I think it's Boxall and Purcell have this formula that performance is a function of ammo. A is ability, knowledge, and skills. But the M and the O are motivation and opportunity. And if, as you were saying in that example, people can't get to what they need to get through the portal, then the opportunity is effectively reduced to zero, no matter how much their ability and motivation is. And of course, we know that motivation is crucial for people. You can be typically, let's say 60 to 70% skilled for your job. But if your motivation is zero, you're just not going to get out of bed in the morning. So it doesn't matter how well skilled you are. So if we have that remit to talk to people openly about motivation and about opportunity, as well as the knowledge and skills part of it, then we truly are a performance engine for the organization, rather than the training department, which does the stuff that people imagine is learning. Whereas in fact, of course, the performance side is much wider.
Absolutely. Actually, Charles Jennings came up with a very good phrase around this. He said something like the conspiracy of convenience. Because when they come to learning, they can offload it, and whether something changes or not doesn't matter.
Everyone feels they've done their thing. They tick the box. Yeah, I asked for the training, they deliver the training. The person went on the training, we've done it. And there's this conspiracy. Nobody's actually looking at what got done. The answer, unfortunately, too often is nothing got done. Stefan, before we wrap up, there's one phrase you've used in previous conversations we've had of learning generosity. I think that's a really interesting idea. Now we've sort of come up to this bigger picture view of what our role is. What for you is learning generosity, and why is it important?
It's probably unconsciously I came up with this term.
Well, I thought it was a great idea. You were talking about people being curious and sharing their experience.
No, you're right. I'm a great believer that learning is not only about consumption, but also about contribution.
Right.
I'm the proud owner now of 300,000 trainers, because everybody has something great to share with at least one other person, and very likely more than one other person. So I've put it on my team, and we've looked at this as a challenge. What do we need to do now to magnify the voices of every single person within the organization? Because there's so much knowledge. And nowadays, with people on LinkedIn, on Facebook, people they're much more used to sharing than ever before. So let them share something useful. I think also generosity for me also links very closely to the notion of curiosity. And that's a beautiful gift that we as learning and development folks can give to the organization, in not only training people's primary skills or secondary skills, but really focusing on people's meta skills. At the end of the day, an organization is everybody's naturally curious. They don't need L&D, and we can do something fun otherwise, So if we're able to point people's attention towards a notion of curiosity, towards growth mindset, towards having the right learning strategies, learn to learn type of things, then I think that generosity will even be enhanced much more. We've done some beautiful work at Cognizant in this space, and we actually see people changing. The moment people have language, the moment have people words. If you've never heard growth and mindset in the same double word, then you're not able to reflect on it. But the moment people have that language, they reflect on it, and at least 50% of them, they tell us 3 months later that something has actually changed for them. They become more interested. Also, in terms of their learning hours, and I'm not a great believer in measuring learning hours, but we're seeing almost learning hours doubling 12 months before and after that people have taken those really short sessions, those eye-opener sessions, I call them. I call them curiosity re-engineering. I think it's a great part also to this learning generosity in sharing and yeah.
And once you've sparked people's interest in how they learn, how they can learn, how that can affect their personal growth, their productivity, once you've sparked that, then this idea of unleashing your 300,000 trainers becomes so much stronger because they are, from their own will, without having to be told, going out, naturally sharing and being multipliers of knowledge in their organization, taking good stuff and spreading it across the organization. Yep. Let's wrap up with our final questions, which we always wrap up for every guest. Firstly, what do you wish you'd known when you'd started in learning and development, and what are you curious about right now? And I'm going to guess you might say you're curious about curiosity, but you'll have to tell us more about that. So what do you wish you'd done when you started, and what are you curious about?
Now I would have needed so much more knowledge in cognitive psychology, in the basic stuff, the baselining of knowledge, how great leaders, how great people have been thinking about learning so far. You're talking about Knut Eliaris, Jack Mirizov, all the people that I only found out probably in the last couple of years. The really big thinkers, John Dewey, beautiful thinker in the area of learning. I would have wanted to learn so much more about those great things, because I also winged it for a long time, still am, I think. But I'm trying to be aware of it and read up a lot about it. So that's probably what I would have loved to. What I'm really, I love learning. I love reading. I'm getting ready to start a bachelor in philosophy. Maybe I came to an age. I'm still young. I think I'm 52 now. But
you're young. Don't worry.
I want to keep on learning. I'm a great reader, and I want to get deeper into stuff. And I'm also very interested in curiosity.